Okay, we are calling to order this October 2024 meeting of the JMRL Board Policy Committee. And the first item on our agenda is to continue with our discussion of the material selection policy. Last meeting, and David, jump in to help me out any moment here. Okay, great. Consider we've only just started.
Yeah.
And just establishing the context that we are kind of midstream in our review of the material selection policy. And last meeting, we got through sort of the first half of it and also kind of opened up some broader or philosophical questions. And I think our goal is to maybe do a quick review, David, and maybe you can kind of drive this. Where did we get last month, and then what's left?
Sure. So we made it about halfway through a word by word review down to gifts. So that's a little bit under halfway through. The discussion was mainly driven by kind of our broader view of JMRL policies, trying to make them friendly and accessible to people so that they know how to engage with them. So what are the ways that we could do that? There was some discussion about bringing in various national resources higher up here. So the ALA materials that we talked about, maybe moving that higher up in the conversation. We went through, we also did a review of the other libraries policies that we looked at. We just talked about those briefly. And so we went through the criteria for selection, kind of shared what JMRL's criteria for selection are and how those compare with other library systems. And then we had some conversation about, we got into the weeds a little bit about like government documents and things like that, and finished these 7 things here and had a discussion also about what does core collection mean. Then we had a discussion about classification and where that belongs in JMRL's documentation.
Great. So essentially, we have sort of a workflow where we see what's there, develop bullet points at a higher level or conceptual level of things that we want to be there, especially if we're rewriting from scratch, which is not really what we're doing here. So I think we have in the comments on the side is where some of these bullet points are in terms of concepts or conceptual ideas we've come up with. We did not turn those into a draft language yet, and we'll do that after we get through kind of the second half. So that my goal for the next meeting is to be able to start with sort of offline. Usually we take those bullets, somebody, and it's various volunteers from the committee, turns that into a sort of draft text that encapsulates the concept bullets that we came up with. Then we can look at that and sort of move towards a final wordsmith. So I think my goal for today would be able to get through all the bullet points to give that intrepid volunteer everything they need to come up with a revised draft language for next month. So I think there is one of the topics you touched on. I do want to reopen or rediscuss in some more detail, but let's maybe get through the second half first, and hopefully we'll have time to come back to that.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Please.
I heard you mention the conceptual bullets, and I'm wondering, is there also like, and it's probably just because I'm new, but I'm wondering about what is it kind of like that we want this policy to do, if that makes sense? Like, what are those concepts kind of serve? And is there like a desired state or sort of outcome for what a policy like this enables that has been part of the conversation that's part of this?
Yeah, so good question. And sometimes we will sort of look at a policy overall and just kind of, sometimes it hasn't. Generally, we review these every 10 years, so sometimes it's been a while since we looked at it. And so sometimes we write kind of what I call a green field. We just say, what along the lines, take it from the top, what is this supposed to accomplish? And then what are the bullet points that we'd like to see it cover, and then turn that into text. In this case, we took sort of, it's a core, this is actually kind of the single most important policy we have, which is why we're gonna end up taking, I think, 3 meetings at least on it. What we did was, and David kind of alluded to this, we got a stack of other material selection policies statewide, used AI and our own eyes and brains to kind of summarize what are the top in terms of, if you took a vote out of those 20, what are the top 20 out of those policies, what are the top 10 bullet points that you see? And we sort of reviewed that to make sure that what we already had was in line with those. And I think that was one thing that was encouraging, which was basically we had covered those top 10 already here. So I think we took that as a comfort level of, hey, we've got this already. What's here covers the bases that we would want it to cover. And so now it's a matter of rewording or moving things around for better communication and better clarity and so forth. Does that make sense? So that analysis kind of did take place, but I think in this case we got that sanity check that what we have is already in place or consistent with what other standards around the state are. So we didn't feel the need to just start from a brand new blank slate.
Can I ask a clarifying question to your clarifying question?
Sure.
So you mean more what is this body's stated goal or intention for this, or what should the actual policy's stated intention be? Written?
Yeah, more, I think thank you for clarifying my clarifying question. Yeah, maybe more of like a, more of this body, like a to what end, right? Like,
Sure.
which is just a question that I tend to ask.
What are we doing here?
Yeah.
I wasn't here in person for the last meeting, but I appreciated that question where you asked about the CE. Hey, what was the goal or purpose of this? So the board policy committee the board is in charge of our policy manual, which drives at a high level how the libraries, its high level direction for how the library should operate in terms of guidance and outcomes that we want to see. And it also, then there's a separate body of procedures which are operational day to day, and those are sort of in charge, those are developed by the staff and are in charge of the staff. So you think of the board as high level guidance and the staff as day-to-day operations that implement that guidance. The policy also has, in my mind, a very important role because it's what we're showing the public. Hey, here's what we're aspiring to and what we're trying to accomplish and how we go about it. And so there's a couple 100,000 patrons, and they have various of them have various questions about various things that we do. And so we start with here's what the policy says, and it's gone through this kind of consensus process and how it got here. It's not arbitrary. We're trying to follow these high level guidelines. So our role our process as a organization is every 10 years, or in some cases more frequently, we review every single policy in the book and what needs to change, what do we leave out, what do we miss, what can we improve. And so this is part of that general 10-year review. So one question could be, do we need to have a material selection policy at all? Okay, I think our consensus answer is yes, but you can start with that. But our goal as a committee, and the meetings are each pointed for that goal, is to have the best and most up-to-date and most applicable policy manual that describes how the high-level guidance for how the library should operate. Was that way more detail than you were looking for? Or
I love detail.
Or is that what the question was?
I feel like what I heard you say was, our goals are to, this policy is meant to promote transparency. Despite, is what I heard you say.
Well, the goal in
then
having
I'll
a policy.
suss out as we go, and I'll ask other.
The goal in having a policy is for transparency, and then the goal of this particular policy is so everyone that funds the library and visits the library and utilizes the library will know, why did JMRL choose these materials out of the millions of materials they could have chosen? Some people might have questions about that, and we're gonna be able to say this is how that happened.
It's helpful.
Yeah, and how this policy reflects the board's mission and values. So how decisions are made about selecting materials in order to make sure that JMRL is working towards meeting its mission and values.
I think another thing about our policies is that we've also put in, connection to the lower, to forms and things that people might need. So that
Like
they look
wayfinding.
at this general, and then they know where to go. So again, allowing that accessibility.
And that's sort of a hybrid of, we're always kind of riding this balance, is we want high level guidance, but we also want this to be practically useful for the end patron. And so that's what Martha's alluding to. Sometimes we not only say, well, here's, how you would, if you want to put something on the bulletin board in the library, what's your policy about who can do that and when, but then we also a lot of times put in how, because you're already there, and then that tells you, how we.
Or the where, or referral to the.
Ask this person or go to this place.
Yeah.
Thank y'all for humoring me.
There's one more that didn't come up is, especially a policy like this, it can't be too esoteric because staff has to implement. So that's why it's so important to have Melissa, people here to make sure that we're not, subscribing to something that isn't practical and implementable. The word implementable.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Right. So another way I think about it is we always include staff as part of this committee because they're the ones day to day that have to live with, if we're given this guidance, hey, well, that's going to work or it doesn't work. And sometimes also it works the other way around. We're asking the staff, what tools do you need as a policy to deliver the services the way we want them delivered? So sometimes it's a two-way.
This does remind me, Siri. Siri, welcome to the policy committee. The board members of the policy committee are yourself and Anne and Mike and Martha, and the staff members are Camille Thompson, who's the Gordon Avenue Branch Manager, Lisa Farrow, who's the Assistant Library Director,
Never seen her.
myself, right? Meredith Dickens is our collections manager, and she's joining us as a special special guest because of the nature of this. And Sierra Nabziger takes the notes for all of the board's meetings. My phone keeps, every time I say Siri, it keeps jumping at me.
I think going to Chick-fil-A and they ask you, can I have a name for this order?
Okay, so I think right, there's a lot of detail in what we talked about 2 months ago. And you can see, I was just doing it just to see how long the comments are. They're much longer than the body of the document. So there's a lot to talk about and what we've already talked about. Mike, I think that's a good strategy. We've come out today with, here are all the concepts that we want to get in there, and then assign a working group to work on the nuts and bolts of it. We also have some issues that have popped up in the last few weeks. I'm not quite sure if they'll get shoehorned into the remainder of the policy, but we'd like to see addressed specifically about AI developed materials. Just all of a sudden in the last 2 weeks, there's a huge library deal about it. So I'd like to talk about it.
That sounds interesting and important.
Yes, and right. If we don't address it now, we're going to be 10 years behind then.
Or 3 years, emergency.
Okay, so gifts, the library accepts, and we also have separate policies for gifts that are non-book related gifts. So this is specifically, I'm sorry, for books and materials. This is specifically for dealing with somebody gives you something and says, I want it to be added to the library collection. Accepts gifts of library materials for consideration as additions to its collection. Gifts are subject to evaluation according to the same selection standards as materials considered for purchase. The library reserves the right to use any gift as it sees fit. Upon acceptance, all gifts become property of the library. Okay, so that's sometimes a hard concept to get across to people. They'll say, oh yeah, I think you should have this book. And the library staff will say, we'll take it, but once you give it to us, it might end up going to the Friends of the Library for sale in their book sale if the decision is made not to add it. One thing that's made that conversation a little easier in the past few years is Meredith's development of the Local Voices collection, because we used to have to tell local authors, no, I'm sorry, your book has not been reviewed in these sources, or it's not available from our resources, our sources rather. So now we have a materials collection, little mini policy in here, basically about local voices. It's linked from here.
So I see the first paragraph under gifts
Yeah.
as being try a nice way of communicating to everyone, hey, we don't just put in anything that you give us necessarily. So does that need to be, is that clear? Is it communicated in the right way? I think it probably is.
I think it has worked well.
Yeah.
To this point.
Just to clarify.
Yeah.
Instead of just having gifts, because I think it is confusing, because we have a whole other gift policy, right?
Right.
Just say gifts like books and materials.
In the actual
Yeah,
title
I
here.
think that's good.
Actually, I think that's smart.
Library materials, maybe.
Whatever you want.
I'm working on it. All right. Materials of local, historical, or genealogical interest pertaining to the library service area will be accepted as follows. Published histories of a general interest, deed books, birth, marriage, and death records, census records, church and cemetery records. Let's get through this whole section and come back to it. So donors of family histories and other items not listed above will generally be referred to local historical societies. Ephemera of any type will not be accepted. Ephemera is a very library word.
It certainly is.
What is defined?
defined?
It's defined.
It's defined, yes. But maybe just, well, okay. So is this still true that materials of local, historical, or genealogical interest in this way, like deed books? I know at one point a few years ago, the cities,
I thought they were in the clerk's office.
they were in the clerk's office, they digitized them all, so they were gonna get rid of the physical copies. And at that point, the ACHS, the Historical Society, took them because it's like a room
Yeah.
full.
It is.
JMRL didn't have room for it, so now it's at the basement of the McIntyre building in the Historical Society's collection. So it's not technically JMRL's collections.
But if we're talking about Louisa or Scottsville or Green or some other location, it does end up at the library
It
sometimes.
depends.
Yeah,
Some of them have their own separate Historical Society
yeah.
buildings and
We generally aren't putting those things in
we
our collection.
generally are not adding.
I haven't been offered them as, like, the last, the 3 of the 4 bullet points. I haven't been offered recently, and if so, we probably would refer them to the local historical
Right.
society.
I don't want.
Yeah, so this makes it sound like we're gonna take those.
Yeah,
Like,
we're-
if the church came and said, here's the record of all of our baptisms and
We would tell
funerals,
them, go to the
We
Historical
wouldn't.
Society of Louisa or Nelson or Green.
I believe so.
So do we
It's
need
more
to?
in scope with those
Can you also read
collections
that?
currently.
Did you just change will to may?
Yes.
I would, we need to take that out then.
You wanna take the whole section out?
I mean, I don't know about published histories of a general interest, but the other 3.
I mean, it sounds like we're just not using those as far as
We're not
the
accepting.
JMRL collection. I
Well,
don't
think about census records, like we don't get published census records anymore.
Well, it could be historical in some sense.
Yeah. Oh, right, so it could be on the years ago census.
This was the door to.
I would maybe be in favor of just striking the list and just saying materials of local, historical, or genealogical interest pertaining to the service area may be accepted without getting into that level of detail.
And then leaving will in general, because all of them basically generally will be referred to local.
So potentially striking that.
We have had some family histories that we put to local voices.
Say may be accepted or referred to a local history.
What I'm seeing conceptually is that the last 3 are more of a record, and the first one is more of a narrative type of thing. So maybe that's the distinction. It sounds like if you have historical records, I'm looking now at the sentence below your strikeouts. We put something about historical records, where we generally refer to historical society instead of the not
So
like.
maybe donors of family histories and other historical records will generally be referred.
Yeah, let's say donations of.
This is probably more in the weeds than we wanted to be at today's meeting. right?
We might as well get it done.
I love typing with an audience.
Yeah.
Clean that up. Summary of any type will not be accepted. Okay, the library does not attempt to acknowledge acceptance of every gift it receives, but will provide acknowledgement upon request of the donor. Is that also true?
We do attempt to acknowledge it's not possible sometimes. For instance, if somebody buys something off our Amazon wish list, we don't know who bought it. We can't send a thank you. I see this as more of a safety to say in this situation.
Brent, can we turn
but
it
does
to
not attempt
may not be able to, rather than like,
Yeah.
we refuse.
May not be able
We
to.
acknowledge, or just we acknowledge when possible, that sort of thing. This could be a comment.
I believe at one of the other meetings I brought up the idea of making some kind of glossary. And I'm thinking about just eliminate line through all of these different things. Maybe defining historical records at some place. What we as historical records.
In this policy or in a separate?
I'm thinking eventually a separate
FAQ almost.
yeah,
And I think Meredith, tell me if I'm right, you're thinking more about cross communications, not just one appendix for this policy.
oh yeah,
She's talking about a master glossary.
yeah, because we run into these things where we have an assumption of knowledge, either from the language of the discipline of the library or what historical records need to be who are involved. Huh. My kids' artwork, pre-K through our historical record.
The entire fridge from fridge posting.
I've actually distributed to all of them.
Okay, are we good with gifts?
Wouldn't it be better just to say the library will acknowledge acceptance of every gift
when-
where possible?
Yeah, that sort of thing.
And just leave it like that. Instead of not be able to, because that's,
Yeah.
And then the rest of the sentence will have to be words.
just where
When
possible,
possible,
and then
yeah.
delete the rest of it.
Yeah, I think we might have to work on that. Okay. Materials from non-library sources. The library does not accept either permanent or temporary loan of materials from any source, individual or organizations. Individuals or organizations wishing to have materials available at the library may submit them for review as gifts. The policy standards and procedures for gifts will apply. Does this come up that often? Where somebody says, I want you to add this, but then I need it back.
A temporary loan.
Loan of the
I
Gutenberg
haven't
Bible.
been asked for that. I have had somebody say they wanted to donate library materials to be added to the collection so they could come borrow them later. And I had to explain that we can't promise they would be there when you came back for them.
Yeah, I
Not very
think that's pretty well covered
Um,
above.
But just because I haven't been asked doesn't mean it hasn't come up coming from the museum field. I know this is something that sometimes people expect is, oh, I'm going to give you this thing.
I think for non-circulating materials, this comes up for displays. We might borrow a display from the Library of Virginia, still out of contract with them, and they're gonna come get it in 6 months or something. But we've got all sorts of other policies that deal with that stuff.
And I'm not sure the heading, materials from non-library sources,
What does that mean?
is it, we don't add things to the collection that we don't own, is where what I'm getting from the combination of
This
that
means
heading with
more
that
like-
paragraph. And this may also come up with our historical society partnerships in the past, where we have housed collections that belonged to the historical society, and then there was some question when they wanted them back, or when we could no longer house them,
Yeah.
that I only heard whispers about.
So some of that gets addressed on the collection management plan level, where you do have a section about historical societies and partnership.
Yes.
Do we need this? What's the unintended consequence if we strike this paragraph? Somebody comes in and says,
I have to say, no, we can't do that, and they say, why can't you?
I think we would just point to, it says right here that once you give it to us, it's the property of the library.
Yeah.
I think you have
Yeah.
to take that.
Yeah,
So first of all, do we want to ever do this? If someone said you can circulate the Gutenberg Bible for 2025 for its anniversary, would we say yes? You know, I mean, it would probably make an exception, but come up with a slightly less interesting,
Would it be circulating though? Like we give it out to the public, we let them take it home?
what I'm seeing from this, they want us to put it in your collection for a while and then know in advance that they'll get it back later.
But it also contradicts itself because it says the policy, standards and procedures for gifts will apply, which the gifts policy says we can do what we want with it.
You can't.
Well, right, you don't.
Once it's
it's
ours,
actually
it's the
reinforcing it,
library's.
saying the same thing. We don't accept this
As a library.
because the policies for gifts apply.
Yeah.
So do we ever want to have this temporary arrangement? You know,
I
You
wouldn't,
accept
I
it?
wouldn't, it's too ambiguous, it's too, and I think it's okay to have a policy. This eliminate this, the possibility that this is like a family member comes in and says, I have this collection of first edition, you know.
I don't think we would circulate them. I think we would put them on display and we would deal with it as part of the display, which is you could come in and put it in and then take it out at the end.
Yeah, then I think we don't need this.
Yeah, I can't tell what this would apply to.
well, it seems to me you do want a version of the
Basically-
first sentence then to cover Meredith's case where someone asks, why won't you do this? And say it's our policy. That we
Well,
do.
we would, in that case, if we didn't have this clause, I would refer them to the gift,
Upon acceptance. all
gifts of library
become property of the
materials. And I
library.
say, what I can do is accept as a gift.
Okay.
That's personally.
And then
We
display.
do that with, like, when it says organizations wishing to have materials available, we talk to them about that you can give them to the library and we catalog them here. But it's never come up that they want them back.
We get things like pamphlets, you know, Java might give us here, put out these pamphlets about senior services that are available, but they're not part of they didn't get added to the collection.
No,
They're
because it's
covered by the displays and handouts.
Or local governments might give us a document that they want to make available for public review. Typically, though, we just add those. We don't
Yeah.
just keep them for a certain period of time. and come back.
In my experience, there has never been one that they're gonna need back.
It was like an author, Laura Ingalls Wilder, I believe, a descendant in Green, or some connection there. And it's the original writing.
We wouldn't just let people come and check that out and take it
No.
home. They would destroy
It
it.
wouldn't, they certainly would. Where does that go? What policy does something like
I
that?
think it would be either a display or a program. You know, we have policies, but the program would be like, hey, have the family come in, talk about their history with these materials. Everybody gets to see it, you know, take some pictures of it, and then they take it home at the end, and that's the library program.
Or referring them to a research institution that catalogs those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, the types of things we're talking about, JMRL does not serve that function in this.
Right, we're not an archival
The
organization.
university does, or the state library.
That might be worth putting in here somewhere conceptually, is we operate as generally as a circulating library. Now, I don't know about reference, if there's encyclopedia that stays in the library.
The reference section.
Yeah, we do still have reference materials that don't circulate.
Right.
So I wouldn't say
it's
that we're
our
not
plan.
circulating, I would say that we're not archival.
Yeah.
But we-
But otherwise, I think I'm in favor of just striking this because it's, the cost benefit of including more text doesn't sound like it's used very much.
Request for purchase I'm sorry, are we ready to move on? The library welcomes suggestions from library users for titles to purchase as additions to its various collections, print books, digital content, periodicals, and audio-visual materials. All suggested titles are considered according to the criteria outlined in the material selection policy. Not all titles suggested will be purchased. Library users may request notification of the library's decision regarding the purchase of suggested items. And we get roughly what percentage?
Between 50 and 100 a month, a week.
Or percentage that has been purchased.
Oh, 85% we say yes to.
85% of the suggestions we get JMRL is able to purchase, and the rest of them are things like
Out of print,
out of print.
they're unavailable formats.
I think that's pretty good.
85%?
It's a high number.
It's really huge, yeah.
It's a very popular service, and people are very appreciative of that.
And sometimes people ask for things that we were gonna buy anyway. They just got to it before we did.
Now that last sentence is moot because Meredith and Sierra notify everybody of the decision.
The form asks you, would you like to be notified? Because some people don't,
They don't want to.
they just want to let us know about something.
They're just like, you should have this.
Yes, yeah.
But there's still a question, does this need to be in the policy
Yeah.
that we're telling the staff, we want you to make sure you offer that?
I think the board would want to make sure that the staff is offering this, right? I mean, you wouldn't, if we shut it down tomorrow and yeah, people would come to the board to talk about why did you shut down this service?
And it's much easier now than it was 15 years ago, when you would actually have to write them a letter or call them or something.
It's a symbiotic
Yeah.
thing too. It's a useful tool to see what it is that
People
people
ask
are
for.
looking, what are people wanting from the libraries? Or do we need to get more copies of something? If there's something that's not on our radar that becomes a smash hit, and people start flooding the inbox. Okay, that part's perfect. Moving on. Any library user has the right to request reconsideration for an item in the collection in accordance with JMRL Reconsideration Policy 4.24. Requests for reconsideration forms are available at each public service desk. The library supports the American Library Association's ALA, Bill of Rights, freedom to read, free access to libraries for minors, and freedom to view statements.
So can we pop open the request for reconsideration
Policy?
policy? And maybe David, you or Meredith can talk just a few briefly to set context. Regarding library materials, when does this happen? How often does it happen? What are the types of requests that were received?
Yeah, that's a whole other CE probably, but the reconsideration policy as is pretty to the point. It's short, it's brief. It just says you have the right to reconsider materials at the library, and basically it points you to, it's the same language effectively that's in the policy we're looking at. We keep stats on that for about for 5 years, I think.
5 years, right.
That's correct. So I just shared them with all staff on all staff training day, so I should know them on the top of my head. But I think the total number of individual requests was something like 20 over the last 5 years. Is that
We're just looking for a high level.
ballpark, right?
So yes, patrons of the library.
Yeah, patrons who ask for materials to be reconsidered. And they vary from which branches, which collections, what they're asking the library to do. Are they asking us to remove it entirely or to reclassify it? That's
Yeah, there have been two, the formal form, this form has been enacted twice in 2024. It was 4 times in 2020, 5 times in 2023. 2022 was our largest year. It was 8 or 9 times. And then before that, once or twice a year.
So my thought that's been sort of surfaced from this meeting and last meeting, so we point to this reconsideration policy from various places. And we don't need to necessarily decide to duplicate the language, so maybe we could just do a pointer instead of duplicate. But when this is what's here is 100% process. It says, you fill out the form, someone's going to reconsider it. If you don't like that, you can appeal here and, so forth. It's the process, but it doesn't describe, I think in my mind, I think it's important to tell the patron who's asking for reconsideration, here's the criteria we're going to use, and we know in advance. And in my mind, I had thought that this pointed back to the material selection policy, say, well, when we reconsider, these are the criteria we're going to use. We took a lot of time to write them up, and they're in this, you can find them in this other document. But it turns out that pointer isn't here at all. So I guess I'd like to throw that out and the other, this also dovetails into the other thorny question of is one of the options to reclassify the materials, and then is it written down somewhere that's accessible to the patron, what those criteria would be. So there's kind of two things that could happen. You're either going to include it or not according to some criteria, and you're either going to classify it in one place or another according to some criteria. I don't think that chain is all documented fully in my mind right now.
Is that a chain that we want to put out there?
I-
We have, I mean, to me, that is the staff level, that this is the conceptual level, and then that's the working of the staff.
I feel pretty strongly that it should be accessible somewhere, because if I ask for something to be reconsidered and I get the answer no, and a patron Camille asks something and she gets the answer yes, now I can be upset about that because it's arbitrary. I don't know what criteria you used. You liked Camille and you didn't like me. I think the point of all of this is to transparently describe in advance, here's what we're going to do and why. And then
To me, that maybe here, if this is included in the material selection policy, which it currently is, then I think it should do just what the GIFT does, which is point back to, does it meet the criteria for selection of materials?
But agreed that conceptually, if the reconsideration is, are you going to include this or not?
Right.
Absolutely agree that that's what it needs to end up pointing back to. But I'm saying I don't think right now it does point to that.
So can't we put some language here that says, request for reconsiderations will, users are like.
Here's the process and the
they
criteria
will-
comes
they
with it.
will, what does it say under gifts up here? It says, library accepts gifts of library materials for consideration as additions to its collection. Gifts are subject to evaluation according to the same selection materials and materials considered for purchase.
Yes.
So, items are subject to evaluation for reconsideration according to the same selection standards as materials considered for purchase.
Procedurally, we also, when we're handing someone the reconsideration form, hand them the material selection policy and the policy that applies to, well, if it's the item in the collection, we hand them that. If it was a display policy. So.
That circular point too, would it be appropriate to add a link to the form? Like right here, there's like a local voices hyperlink.
we could add a link.
Other section, is that hyperlinked too?
This is not currently, but it could be.
So the way that's a good question, and the way that's implemented right now, that link is in the reconsideration policy. And the reason is because, as David was trying to point out, handouts goes to reconsideration, displays go to reconsideration, programs go to reconsideration. So if you just point everywhere there, same form, and that's where the link is. If you put it here, then you just got a link in two places, and they might get out of sync or something. So just structurally, that's how it's structured right now.
I don't understand why it's even in this policy. A separate policy.
I think the goal here,
I mean, we're rewriting
right
now the request for reconsideration, which is policy 4.24. That's not what we're doing today, right? only looking at this policy of material. This is a separate issue. We're just looking at bringing in materials, right, to the library. Removing materials, that's a whole nother, I think that's a whole nother issue.
It has its own policy, to your point.
Right, that's this 4.2.
I think this is basically just telling people this has its own policy. And
I
Mike,
don't think we
Right.
should
do you
be.
think the other
rewriting this
policy is, it needs to be rewritten, you know, if it doesn't give enough, if it is like a loop, basically, then which one needs to be worked on? Probably the,
So Ann, I take your point, but I also think it's important for us to always have the bigger picture in mind and not fix one part where then the big picture doesn't come together. So that's why
I mean, I'm fine with looking at this reconsideration, but I don't think we should be doing it today. I think we need to finish the material policy, and then that's a separate. I think that's a separate issue. So,
what are the criteria? It's,
Yeah.
So I have a couple answers. So first of all, in all of these, as I was just kind of discussing, in reconsideration is the separate reconsideration policy is the landing point for where we notify, hey, if you want us to reconsider the program, here's your process. If you want to reconsider the display, here's your process. So here, I think we need some reference at least to, if you want us to reconsider a material, here's what the process is.
right.
So I
And we can
wouldn't
point
just,
to the policy. I just don't
Right.
think we need to be rewriting it today. That's all.
and then there's a question of, again, in the big picture, I feel pretty strongly we need to end up in a place, whether it's today or, but I think it kind of needs to go hand in hand with this, that when you're getting something reconsidered, here's the criteria we're going to use. So I think I do like, David, your suggestion, which we kind of leave this paragraph as a pointer. And then in each of these, whether it's materials or programs or whatever, we say, when you reconsider, we're going to use the criteria that are outlined in the applicable relevant policy. It's the same thing that Camille was mentioning that we're already doing in terms of handing of two things. I just think it needs to verbally say, because somebody might not go to you and get something handed to you. They might just be researching in advance. How does this work? Then that needs to be written down.
Or maybe on the form,
If you did that, then the form, yeah,
like a link on
the
the
form would have to have, 10 links to 10 different criteria. Because there's 10 different types of things. It may not be 10.
But I think the question that Ann is bringing up is, this policy is about purchasing materials. We have a separate one for reconsideration. Should reconsideration be included in a policy that's talking about purchasing?
You do that yeah, go ahead.
the next section is about weeding. So you could make that same argument, remove all the weeding stuff, because there is no separate weeding policy, that I'm aware of, is there?
No,
And
this
that's why
is-
You would have.
It's here.
It's
Yeah.
here
Right.
because this is,
This is more
because selection for materials is also an initial purchase, but also a
part of the life
continuous
cycle,
review.
right, yeah, that Meredith has,
I'm just saying it's a separate policy. And
I agree.
and it's an important policy
I agree.
that has some implications.
I don't mind saying here to the public, hey, we have that policy.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
That's fine.
And I'm fine with adding a line there that says, and probably we need to crack open the other policy, and then we can lay out those, like, here are the criteria that we use.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right, the other policy is procedure only right now. So my concern is if we just say, well,
It's
here's
not
the
a we
procedure.
have a whole separate procedure for,
I use that word,
it's, I hear what
I
you
didn't
mean.
use, that wasn't intended as library jargon.
Right.
It's procedural in nature. It
Right.
tells
Do
the
this.
process, use the word process instead. So we don't, it's strictly a process, but they need to understand, I'm following this process and I'm applying these criteria, and that piece needs to be, I feel pretty strongly it needs to be somewhere that we're describing what criteria we're gonna be using in that case. Now, if we put 5 different pointers to 5 different criteria because we're linking back to the displays and handouts and so forth, I guess we could do that.
I mean, so if the question on the table is Ann's question is, should we remove this entirely? Or should we leave it as is, or should we tweak it a little bit to say like, hey, here are you remember earlier in this policy when we said these same 5 things apply?
Yeah, that's fine.
I think it's fine.
And then later we'll look at the reconsideration after we finish this one.
What's the year on that? That would have to be out of, 2018.
We can.
We can do it whenever.
If we identify that it's,
Discretion.
yeah, there's an important gap here, we can pull it up because I think they need to go hand in hand.
I would be, sorry, new girl always with a ton of questions. I would be curious if / when we get to that, for myself, understanding where the distinction between the board role and the staff role sort of lies as it relates to that, because I feel like I'm responding to hearing you note that some of the evaluation, right, is happening in a different space. So I'd like to, yeah, maybe when we have that conversation, parse out what part of that policy, if any, right, is the.
So essentially, we're always riding this balance. We're balancing 3 things. The 2 that you just mentioned, and the 3rd that I think is important is just communication to the public also. So it's a great question, and it's something that comes up pretty much every time we pop up in a new thing. What belongs at the board level, what belongs at the staff level. And to me, yeah, this could all be staff, right? To say, hey, professional librarians, they have library degrees and they're going to do what they learn to do. But I think personally, it's important enough that the public needs to understand what they're doing and why. That's why we write it down and communicate that.
Transparency.
Shall we move on? Withdrawals and discards, the library uses weeding. This is in your glossary, right? As a collection development tool. Its purpose is to maintain throughout the system library collections of high quality that are appropriate in size to the capacity of their locations and that are current, accessible, and appealing to users. Items are withdrawn from the collection when they are dated, worn, or damaged beyond repair, or if interest in a title or subject is decreased. Withdrawn items will be disposed of through book sales, recycling, or donations. Items deemed unfit for sale or donation will be discarded. Oh, this is the end. Great. Items are withdrawn from the collection database when they are reported as lost and paid or are missing for at least 1 year. So I see, Meredith, I think you had, 2 notes there. Donations, like what does that, withdrawn items will be donated. Do we have a guidelines for that? And maybe that's just something that's to the discussion right here that just belongs in the staff level procedure, saying if the board says it's okay to donate them, then we come up with, give them to the schools or give them to local groups, whatever. And then lost and paid.
Oh, this is a niggly thing, that we can now distinguish between lost and paid and damaged and paid. And if we're gonna say, I think this whole sentence, I'm not sure if this is policy level or procedural level.
Yeah, that does seem pretty in the weeds.
It's very specific about when we delete it. We're basically when we delete the data about the items.
And we've got internal procedures for that. Does the board care? The board members care?
I'm happy with that as a procedure. Partly because I just don't think it's publicly important for someone to understand if it's going to get withdrawn. Yeah, and I think in the previous sentence, disposed of donations, I'm happy with that being open, unless part of Meredith's context is she wants to make sure there's a tool. If someone doesn't like the way we donated something, you need a criteria to point to.
And I'm happy that being the staff procedural, here's the guidelines of who we can decide. The tricky question comes up is when an individual comes and says, well, if you're getting rid of it, can I have it? And who do we say yes to and who do we say no to? Generally, we don't say yes to individuals because, to your point, Mike, why would we say yes to one person that we like and one person that we not
Or
like?
they're just, that was a perception.
So we wouldn't do that. So then we generally say to groups if there's a specific need that we can fill, and we have already made the decision to. I think those guidelines can.
A lot of that happens at the Friends of the Library,
Well, the Friends are not taking our withdrawals anymore.
but they are donating a lot of books to individual groups.
We
Yeah,
do
yeah.
refer them. If somebody asks, if an individual asks, we said we need to check with the Friends of the
Yeah, that's what
Library.
Yeah, that happens quite a bit where Peter will help a group find materials for their
I mean, I've
project.
done that for a couple organizations. Peter's willing to, consider it.
So I had a staff member ask where do we draw the line on donations, and that's why I brought this up. I do think that it could be addressed at the staff level. We'll draw up some language that staff have available.
This is more in the waves. This is right, like our staff wanting to know, it kind of, like some of our branches have a magazine exchange, or it's not really an exchange. It's like, here are the old magazines that we're gonna recycle, come take them if you want them. And some don't. So, could somebody come to one branch and say, well, you need to offer this because the other one doesn't? So, because technically they're donating it to the members of the public. Anyway, we'll work that. I'm not too worried about
Yeah,
that.
I think-
But I'm happy to check this comment off and leave the existing unless Meredith has some
I'll make it.
additional.
We make my note, if I get rid of this comment, we make a note that that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I'll get an email that's resolved. And that.
So the one big thing that we talked about 2 months ago, is some language in here to address platforms that offer content that JMRL doesn't have the say over. You know, we subscribe to Canopy. Our users can check out, they can watch movies through this streaming service, but JMRL has no control over what gets offered there. So I think we need some language acknowledging that, and maybe just acknowledging it. I don't know, maybe just saying there are some materials that are offered to the public that JMRL has no control over. We're part of a consortium for our ebooks, so there are things available there that JMRL did not purchase. We purchase a lot, but there are some things that belong to some other library, or they purchased it for the consortium. So how do we just need to say this is the way it is, basically?
If you can identify what those platforms are.
I mean, that'll change over time.
Well, we would characterize it broadly.
Yeah.
I think what we taught, my recollection is we just wanted to say, we've chosen these because they match our overall goals with collection and they match our overall mission and values.
Yeah, I put some.
But we may not have individually, we not have been able to individually consider each offering through the platform.
Yeah, I put some unofficial language in my comment there is that we evaluate the platform on their selection guidelines according to our general authority, relevance, accessibility, et cetera. Yeah. Well, it's just-
So I think this is okay. I think this is at the draft development stage. It's been pointed out, and Meredith has some great start at some.
So
maybe up at the top in the guidelines section, it could be
Hmm.
a sentence that we evaluate some platforms, these criteria, when we cannot hand select titles.
Doesn't need a separate paragraph is what you're saying, a separate header.
It would be naturally would come up in the guidelines.
So just this, if you don't mind, Mike, the AI thing, so just a few things happened in the past few weeks on a national level. There's a lot of chatter in the library Twitterverse or whatnot about public libraries discovering that some of the content from third-party providers that they were offering was offering AI-generated content. Audiobooks specifically that weren't created by a human, some also maybe not read by a human if that's, if it's an audiobook. And at the same time, somebody made a gift to JMRL of a children's book that was AI generated there. So does the board need to address this? Does it make any difference in terms of we're gonna apply these standards to it, whether it was a human who wrote it or a machine? I just thought we should, while this is open and this is happening now, we need to be thinking about the next few years. What do we need?
I mean, even if it's a machine who wrote it, the machine may have sourced the material from other copyrighted items. And then,
The machine
like,
didn't,
enabling
the machine didn't write it.
problems.
I think it might come under the criteria we already have, is that if we're evaluating a work on the authority, significance, reputation of the author or producers and the importance of the subject matter,
We don't want to box ourselves in to say we'll never have AI generated content in the collection if it is useful to the public to access that content. However, we would, again, at staff level, make sure that we note, one of the conversations we're having is how to catalog materials and document them in ways that it makes it very clear the origin of the contents. But that would be at the cataloging level, or in the catalog, people would know what they're getting. In the meantime, the authority, significance, and reputation of the author and producers would allow us to say no to most of what's being produced right now.
Because we don't know what.
Another one that's come up is materials that are out of copyright, like boxcar children.
Yeah.
People just fly by night producing, telling, like feeding the boxcar children into an AI and saying, make me some more, and then selling those as new boxcar children books because the copyright doesn't exist anymore. So we would evaluate those based on these criteria.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them are amazing and kids are going to want to read them.
And in this case, this one that we just learned about, the reputation of the publisher, if it comes from that publisher, I know that it's not reputable, right? So, yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I don't know how we would address it.
Or if we need, it does,
Or if we need to.
is the board interested in weighing in on this, or is that just strictly
Yeah, from
what's the
another
difference?
perspective, I
Right.
know what my perspective
Serious, like, I mean, these are serious issues that are unknown, right? So, I mean, how is the Virginia Libraries Association, are they helping, or are there?
I think their immediate response was, wait, what?
This is all so new.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fresh. People are learning about it. There's a
I mean, I
director's AI
hesitate
working
to,
group.
develop policy before we really understand.
That's a great point. Yeah.
We want to remain flexible for the future and for greater understanding.
Yeah.
So maybe we just leave it as is for now.
I
And
think the
maybe-
staff has enough guidelines to go on with this to evaluate the
and maybe it
contents
would
that
be
come
something
across.
like a few of our other policies, the board sets a policy, the staff works on a procedure. Staff want, a lot of times, every scenario, what should I do in every single scenario, which is of course not possible. So instead it's like, here are a few examples. So maybe you could include some examples in the collection management plan or somewhere to say like, hey, these are the types of things we're seeing. Here's how our policies would.
Test cases for the evaluation. Yeah.
Or links to the one where the one I was looking at where there's an image, it's a children's book, so there's a picture of a Ferris wheel, but like all the cars are going in different directions and like all the kids on it would be dead if that was actually a Ferris wheel.
It's really fun. No, the dead part,
Yeah, right.
going into.
Okay. Thank you for humoring me there. Okay, Mike, what else did you want to discuss about this before we figure out next steps?
I think we're pretty much out of time. My remaining uncertainty, as you hear, is again, this in my mind, underlies the reconsideration process. So when reconsideration happens, somebody needs to know that these are the criteria. And so we need to structurally just figure out how to link those together. But at the same time, we don't have time to further discuss it today, but it's not, again, I'm hearing that reconsideration is not always, should we have this in the collection or not? It's sometimes what category should it be placed in? And to my understanding, it's definitely not here. We don't talk about categorization in material selection. And I'm not sure that it's even super clear just based on David and I sort of offline pinged through some procedures if it's documented there. So I think we need to be able to tell people in advance, here's the criteria we use when we're choosing to classify materials. I'm using library jargon of a young adult book, and there's an example. We do this, but I'd like some transparency that's available to patrons around how and why do we do this. And I'm not clear in my mind yet that that's readily accessible.
We've been talking about this as well, and like JMRL has a material selection plan, collection development plan. We do not have a classification plan because that's the professional work that librarians do. And I don't anticipate developing a plan just to meet this need. So where does it land? If the board feels like we need to be transparent about this and get this information out there, one potential place is in the collection.
Yeah.
The collection management plan, because it's part of collection management there, which is a staff document. So one of the things that I think might be useful, we've always said that we're going to finish this policy and then the collection management plan, the procedural version, needs to be done. It's been waiting for this. So I would suggest that we take any feedback that this group has, give that to Meredith and to the staff working on this, incorporate that into the collection management plan, and then provide the board with a CE on that to give them a chance to see it and potentially endorse it or to hear about it. And then if it's not meeting the need, the board decides that doesn't meet our needs, then we can reopen that discussion. Continuing ed.
That was the thing we did last time where we just talked about, we just learned stuff. But didn't
It's
do
the thing
anything.
at the end where you said, what was the point of that?
So I think I'm happy with that, but the missing link there is still, we would need to tell the public, hey,
Yeah.
here's how I see that, this is where I find this
Yeah.
topic of interest. So I might be interested at that point in referencing
A line
the
here.
existence of the collection management plan somewhere here. So for more details,
Yeah.
here's where you can go. So
And we
that's
can-
where I am.
We can consider this reconsideration policy, right? Even though it's not a change.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like that's what we should do and sooner than later.
It's like a flow chart someplace would be
Yeah.
good too.
I think what the existing from where it would go.
Yeah, it goes up here.
Is that what you found out?
Yeah.
I'm thinking graphical.
Materials, and then we would say the classification of materials and the guidelines there are. It would be part number 7 there.
Right.
I think, Mike, to that point, we've already got a comment in there saying that, so we've got this bullet point that says the selection of materials for the JMRL is the responsibility of the collections manager, and then we would
Just put
include
the word collection. Yeah,
some information about the
I
plan.
think it's great.
Classification would be there.
Sounds good. Okay, I think we're pretty much out of time. If there's any other burning items for today, so we did in our agenda aspire to just do an intro on the bookmobile, but we'll just push that off for another. Okay, thank you, everyone. And the next meeting is in 2 months.
And it's a week early. It's
Oh.
December
It's before the regular board meeting, but the regular board meeting is a little early next month because of December.
in 2 months, in December
I'm
16th.
going to try to rewrite this material selection based on the comments, or are we going to hold on?
I think David and I will probably, within the 2 months, huddle together
Yeah.
and try and come up with some
I
draft.
think it would be good to have a draft with what we've talked about and running it by. I know Meredith, you're not going to be here that day,
Not
so
on that day, but
Yeah.
I will be around before that. to help with it.
I think it would be good to have
Yeah.
a concept of it. Okay, well done.
Thank you.
Thanks all.